Growing up, I had some difficulties. I started having severe issues with anxiety early in my childhood. When I was around 11, my parents divorced and remarried soon after. That was hard for me as I went from having two parents around regularly to having parents that I didn't see much. My mom had to work a lot to support us, and I lived with her most of the time growing up. Not long after that, I began to experience more and more depression, and eventually I started going to therapy. I was put on an antidepressant, and shortly after that I had a suicide attempt at around the age of 13. I spent a few days in an inpatient section of a hospital for minors with mental health issues, and from that time on I was prescribed some mixture of antidepressants, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety medication, ADHD medication, and various other drugs until I was about 17 when I stopped taking them. I wanted to deal with the things that had been causing me pain, but the medication got in the way of that. I probably should not have been prescribed them in the first place, but doctors pushed the drugs and we trusted the doctors. I had a lot of trouble in school. I was often bored. I wouldn't complete assignments or homework most of the time. I struggled to focus. I was a class clown and I disrupted things regularly by making jokes. Some of my teachers I got along with really well, and others didn't like me very much. In my senior year of high school, I dropped out, which was not a very wise decision. I was, and always have been, hungry to learn, but the things being taught often didn't interest me. In my free time, I was learning about psychology, philosophy, religion, mythology, quantum physics, poetry, art, and a bunch of other subjects on my own. I worked a few jobs, but the longest one lasted less than 3 months before I quit. I did a couple telemarketing jobs as well, but I was terrible at them, and they made my anxiety much, much worse. My anxiety and depression at that time became more and more of an interference with my life. Around 19, I got my GED and scored very high in most categories. Around 20, my health started to deteriorate significantly. I'd had issues with stomach pain when I was younger, but it hadn't been a major issue through my teenage years. Suddenly, I was having more and more abdominal pain, nausea, and digestive issues. I was also losing weight, and I felt weak all the time. I had no energy, and I struggled to get around. Over the years that followed, my health got worse, and eventually I moved back in with my mom after having lived on a friend's couch for a while. I was able to get health insurance again through my parents, and at that time I was about 115 pounds probably. My lowest weight, I ended up at 107 pounds, and I'm about 6 feet tall, so you can see how that would be a serious issue. I started going to doctors around the age of 26 to try to find out what was happening. First, we went to our family doctor who couldn't figure out anything. We were then referred to a few specialists, none of whom could find the issue. Then we went to Mayo Clinic. I went through many doctors who did test after test to no avail. I've had multiple colonoscopies, endoscopies, countless blood tests, and more procedures than I'd like to think about. We determined that my body was producing little to no hormones, and I was put on hydrocortisone, thyroid hormone, and testosterone replacement. These helped me physically, but they often cause psychological and emotional issues as well. I rarely ever left the house. Things got really bad to the point that I went into adrenal crisis many times, which is a medical emergency and can result in coma or death. My mom would take care of me during these extreme events, and luckily I made it through. One day I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor because I had developed thrush, a side effect of having my immune system suppressed by medication. Up until this point, the only thing that doctors had determined was the hormone issues, and that I was in a lot of pain and struggling every day. The ear, nose, and throat doctor put a scope in my nose, through my throat, and noticed that my throat was swollen. He ran a food allergy test, which to my incredible surprise I'd had the back scratch test done early on, but that was the extent of allergy testing. When I went back to get the results of the test, I was informed that I'm allergic to garlic. Now you might think garlic, no big deal. It's not like garlic isn't everything, but you would be very wrong. Anything that is pre-made or pre-processed is extremely likely to contain garlic, and unfortunately it doesn't even have to be labeled, or it can be labeled as natural flavors, seasonings, spices. Every meal I ate had garlic in it. Even though I was eating 2 to 3 meals a day, it didn't matter because my body was constantly having an allergic reaction. For those who aren't aware, with a food allergy, the immune system attacks the digestive tract when that allergen is present. Over time, this causes damage to the lining, which prevents the digestive tract from absorbing any of the necessary vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. It also produces some serious gastrointestinal problems, cramping, bloating, brain fog, and a lot of pain. I cut out garlic completely, which turned out to be helpful. I started to gain some weight and overall my health improved. Though I still deal with significant chronic abdominal pain, nausea, and lack of appetite. I make my own meals, though I fight to eat, and I'm currently lucky to do so about twice a day. Not long after finding out about my garlic allergy, I came across information online about autism spectrum disorder and Asperger's syndrome. The more I read, the more things seemed to line up with my own life, and the parallels became more than I could ignore. I went through a dozen blogs, read through many forum posts, and I was amazed because many of the things people on the spectrum were saying and how they were communicating their points of view felt incredibly familiar. I felt like I was reading my own words a lot of the time. I approached my family doctor and asked her about it. She recommended that I find a specialist who could assess me. I found a psychologist who specialized in treating people on the spectrum, and she agreed that it would be a good idea to do the tests. It ended up being around 7 hours of cognitive testing, interview, and my parents also filled out a childhood history. At the end of the process, I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Since then, I have done a tremendous amount of research. I've read many more blogs and watched many documentaries. I've also come to accept myself as I am, and I'm much happier for it. I haven't worked in many years as a result of the physical health issues I have in conjunction with anxiety, executive dysfunction, concentration, sensory processing, and memory problems. Recently, I decided to start a YouTube channel where I could post videos of me playing games, talking about things I find interesting, discussing my experiences on the spectrum, and making comedic skits. In doing so, I hope to help dispel the stigma surrounding autistic people. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for coming by. Have a nice day. Hey everybody, Ultimate Oddball here. If you want to stay up to date with my videos, click subscribe. I release a new video on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I do gaming commentary and review. I talk about my experiences on the autism spectrum, and I share my opinions and thoughts on a variety of matters. My hope is that, through my videos, I can help to dispel some of the misinformation, confusion, and negativity people have regarding autism. Thank you for helping me do that by watching these videos.